Esther, what will you wear when you go into the king?
You have seen to my every need, Hegai. You decide.
But it is customary to request something to take in with you.
Well, in that case, I rely on your wisdom. I shall bring whatever you think I require.
Let us talk a little bit about Esther. Esther is the great heroine of the captivity. She preserves her people from being massacred within the Persian Empire. This is the origin story of the Hebrew or Jewish festival of Purim, which we will get into as we read through the story. Now, Esther herself is living in the capital of Persia, the city of Shushan. As you see, when Cyrus conquered Babylon, the Jews, there's a large population of Jews in Babylon. And when Cyrus conquers Babylon in 539, he then allows many Jews to return to Jerusalem. And many do. However, a good portion remain in Babylon. But there is also another group that moves farther east into Persia. And this is the family of Esther. They moved east into Persia so that she is now living in Shushan. Exactly when Esther lived is a matter of debate. Most scholars agree that it takes place during the reign of Xerxes. Ahasuerus, the name of the king in the story of Esther, is a translation of the same name that is also translated as Xerxes. So it is assumed, for other reasons too, which I'm not going to get into at this time, that she was living during the time of Xerxes. Most scholars don't believe that Esther ever actually happened. They believe it is what they call a historicized myth. And they want to say that it is based on a Babylonian myth or possibly Persian myth of an older origin, but they don't know what one is. Just some myth out there that we don't know about anymore is the origin of the story of Esther, according to most scholars. But we know she was real. She lived in Persia. She married the king, just like it says. Was it Xerxes? We don't really know. Scholars think it was most likely Xerxes, but we can't be positive on that. Now, Esther was an orphan at the time that the story starts. Esther's an orphan. We don't know how long she's been an orphan, but she was raised by her cousin, Mordecai, and that kind of gives me the impression that Mordecai's parents are also already dead, because if they weren't, she would have been raised by her uncle, not by her cousin. But that is how she enters the story. She is described as being very beautiful. She eventually, of course, we know the story, she marries the king, all that good stuff. Now the name Esther is a Persian name. Possibly Babylonian, but most likely Persian. Her Hebrew name is Hadassah, and that is Hebrew for a myrtle tree. What Esther means, again, is a matter of debate. Some people think it is Babylonian, referring to the goddess Ishtar. Other people think it's Persian for star, possibly also relating to woman, but also possibly being a Persian translation for myrtle. So it could be that Hadassah is the Hebrew for myrtle, and Esther is the Persian for myrtle. These are all theories, but we don't really know what it means. It's an interesting idea. Now, of course, we see that there were at least four major groups of Jews in the world at this time. We have the Babylonian Jews. We have the Jews who have returned to Jerusalem, the remnant in Jerusalem. We also have those who had fled into Egypt. There is still a group of Jews in Egypt. They even build their own temple down there eventually. And then we have the Persian Jews. And there are descendants of all of these Jews in the modern day. There are Babylonian Jews today. There are Egyptian Jews. There are even Persian or Iranian Jews. And some still refer to the Iranian Jews as Esther's children. Now, there are some varying conflicting stories about where Esther was buried. There is a town in Iran or Persia that claims to be the burial place of Esther. There's also a town in Israel that claims to be the burial place of Esther. Personally, I think it is more logical that she would have been buried in Persia. She was the queen of Persia. Her family was there. Everything she knew was in Persia. Why would her body be shipped off to Jerusalem or anywhere near Israel? It just makes more sense for her to have been buried in Persia. But this is kind of the extent of our knowledge of Esther. As to her personality, her character, she does seem to be a very compliant, very submissive girl when she's younger. She follows the counsel of her cousin Mordecai completely, without question, seemingly. As she gets older, she gets a little bit more courageous. But even then, it's under the counsel of Mordecai. She shows her character that she is a very courageous woman, But it's not exactly that she's just doing things on her own. She's still submissive. She's still, in a sense, the ideal Hebrew woman, the ideal Jewish woman. And she only goes out of that when she has to, when it is necessary. She prefers being the quiet, submissive wife. Regarding the book of Esther itself, we don't have any clue who wrote it. There are a couple of different versions of the book. What we have in the King James Version and what most modern translations are based on is the Hebrew version. And this is a unique book in all the scripture because it's the only book that does not mention God in any way. It makes no reference to deity. It really makes no reference to any religious ceremony. It doesn't mention sacrifices, doesn't mention prayer, doesn't mention anything about the religion whatsoever, except the brief mention of fasting, but even that is not directly connected to the religion in any way. Now, it is thought that this happened about the same time as the Passover feast, and so her request for fasting was in conjunction with that holy festival, but that's not directly stated in the text. But then we have the Greek version, which is in the Septuagint, and that version adds in like 4 whole chapters that talk about God and Esther's relationship to God, and they talk all about prayer and all that. They bring the religion back into the book. Now, scholars are of the opinion that the Hebrew is the original, and that when they were translating the Greek, they decided to add in all these extras in order to make it appear holier, make it look more like Scripture by putting all these religious references into it. And in later translations, especially into Latin and English and all these later languages, the Hebrew is preserved as the book of Esther. And then in the section known as the Apocrypha are the Greek additions to Esther. And so you can still read these in the modern day as either part of the Septuagint translation or part of the Apocrypha. Now, me personally, it doesn't bother me that the book doesn't directly mention God. It is obvious that Esther and Mordecai are very devout in their religion. It doesn't need to directly mention God in order for us to understand their faith.
Speak clearly.
So now, let us turn
What
to
enemy?
Esther.
Haman, through his enmity towards my kinsman, Mordecai,
Your kinsman? Kinsman?
Haman has decreed death to all the Jews, every man, woman, and child,